My name is Lisa Clark, and I am one of the librarians at NOAA Central Library that hosts library seminars, a platform for the sharing of ideas that support NOAA's mission. The library is very excited today to host Helen Stewart. She will be presenting Safety First and the Leaky Pipeline, two concepts discussed in the Empowering Women in Hydrography initiative from the International Hydrographic Organization. Ms. Stewart is a hydrographer, a member of the Hydrographic Society of the United States, and a current employee of Fugro, USA. In her career of over 2 decades, Helen has worked in many aspects of hydrographic surveying, from nautical charting and deep ocean geological research to unexploded ordnance mitigation and satellite-based engineering hydrography. She has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, a Master of Science in Marine Science, and my favorite, she has both Shellback and Blue Nose certificates. In 2021, Helen began working with the Hydrographic Society of the United States and the International Hydrographic Organization on the latter organization's Empowering Women in Hydrography Project. She has expanded that work with Fugro and with other professional societies besides the Hydrographic Society of the United States since then, with a particular focus on women's safety at sea and on identifying and correcting structural workplace inequities that drive women out of the professional workforce and away from leadership positions. Outside of her professional activities, Helen is an artist, as we can see from her background, a gardener, a touring cyclist, and a couture seamstress. She lives in Houston, Texas, with a viciously thorny lime tree that she adores, way too many cactuses, and her equally beloved cat, who I hope will photobomb us today. And she wants to remind everyone that y'all means all. Hello, little friend. Take it away, Helen. Thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, East Coast people. Good morning, everyone else. Thank you for having me here. Before we get into the main body of the presentation, a little bit of a comment on the material that I'm going to be presenting. The titles that were given for the webinar here are the titles of the International Hydrographic Review white paper articles on the topic that I participated in writing. Those we can make available to the audience afterwards. They are published and publicly available, so you can share them freely. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is health and safety. Health and safety are the foundation that an inclusive workplace culture is built on. If you don't have safety, if you cannot do the absolute most basic level of keeping people's bodies and keeping people's minds in good working order, you're never going to have any of the rest. I will be pointing out throughout the presentation places where safety issues become career development issues, and that gets into the leaking pipeline. So without further ado, you've already had the introduction of me. Pardon me while I have the fun with the slideshow. I want to say, in addition to the introduction that you've already heard, I'm a woman. I'm a woman who worked offshore for 13 years. I'm a woman who's been working as a marine spatial scientist for 23 years now, including my time as a graduate student. Everything that I discuss in here affects me personally, or has affected me personally in the past. Everything that I discuss in this thing will, to anybody in the audience, have affected somebody that you know, and probably somebody that is a professional mentor to you, or somebody who they're your favorite coworker, you really like them. And what I want at the end of this is for everyone in the audience to have a better understanding of how the challenges women in the marine sector and general related disciplines face, and what you can do to start changing that to give your female colleagues safety and dignity in their workplaces. How it started and how it's going. It started with the women in the Canadian Hydrographic Service. These are the people that you see in the picture on the left. The project was rolled out at the 2020 Canadian Hydrographic Conference about a month and a half before the world shut down and we all went into Zoom land. And when we emerged from Zoom land, how it's going, I made a presentation on some of the material I'll be presenting to you at the Canadian Hydrographic Conference last year during the Women in Hydrography session. Again, a lot of this focused on safety because that's the foundation, but it extends all the way through. So why should you make women's safety, health, dignity, and inclusion a priority? I'm going to do a little bit of some numbers and talking about what we've all experienced in the last few years. We have all lost something. Some of us have lost more than others. And in the workforce, we lost a lot there too. I'll let you read the slide for yourself, but the short pieces that I want you to take away are that we've lost in the US workforce or working age population somewhere between 1 New Jersey and 1 Pennsylvania in less than 3 years. That's like saying we've lost an entire country of Belgium, or that you're looking at the Los Angeles metropolitan area. It's an enormous decline in such a short period of time. And what that means is if your organization needs people and it's not making an effort to recruit and retain women, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Full stop. The next slide, we're going to lighten things up a little bit. And here, there will be a tiny bit of audience participation. People are welcome to put things in the chat window if you want. There are 6 people on this slide. I would like people to tell me who among them is an Olympic athlete, who is an immigrant, who is disabled, who has a chronic illness or health condition, and who speaks fluent Swedish. So I'll leave this open for things in the chat window and I'll read them out. Everybody get ready, set, go. Anyone?
Not yet.
Come on, don't be shy, take a guess. One of them should be a total gimme, y'all.
Can you list them again? Someone says.
Okay, who is an Olympic athlete?
And someone just said Simone Biles is an Olympic athlete.
Who is an immigrant? Who is disabled? Who has a chronic illness or medical condition, and who speaks fluent Swedish?
You definitely got the Simone Biles.
Yep. All right, we're gonna jump on forward here.
Oh, we just got one. Top middle Swedish.
Yep. So the top middle is actually the woman in the bottom middle, and that is Marta Vera da Silva. So whoever picked that out, good job. We have Jessica Long, the Paralympian. Everybody knew Simone Biles. Stephen Redgrave on the top right is the only male endurance athlete ever to win gold medals in 5 consecutive Olympics. And he competed in the Sydney Olympics with diabetes. His teammates carried sugar packets in the boat for him. Hiroshi Hoketsu on the bottom left is the oldest participant in a recent Olympics. In that picture there in London in 2012, he was 70 years old, and he's also an immigrant. He is living in Germany. Jessica Long on the top right obviously is a Paralympian. Marta is an immigrant. She lives in the US and speaks fluent Swedish. And Hanya Rostamian is the first female flag carrier for the Republic of Iran. And what I want you all to take away from this slide is it's about unconscious biases. And these are mental shortcuts that we all make based on stereotypes. It's one thing to look at a picture of Simone Biles and recognize her right away, but if we look at Stephen Redgrave here in the bottom middle, if you think of a Olympic athlete, you don't necessarily think of a 50-something-year-old man who goes on the BBC to do public service announcements about getting screened for diabetes. Or we don't necessarily look at a picture of someone like Hanya Rostamian here, who's got fashion sense that I only wish that I had, and say she's the best pistolier on the planet. So with that in mind, I'm having trouble with my technical stuff here. What does an offshore worker look like? What does a surveyor look like? What does a hydrographer look like? What does a fighter pilot look like? In 2020, the Air Force, along with other military services, began a program to increase their pool of potential pilot candidates. Again, I'll let you read the bullet points on the slide for yourself. The short version is that the aircraft cockpit design from the 1970s is such that fewer than 10% of US female pilot candidates are physically capable of flying that plane. Either they don't weigh enough for the ejection seat mechanism to work properly, or they're not tall enough to literally see over the cockpit console, or their arms aren't long enough to be able to reach the ejection levers. The cockpits were redesigned with the F-35 to make a cockpit that was a plane that more people could fly. But the Air Force didn't redesign the T-38 trainer, which is what you need to learn how to fly the F-35. So we have here an example of structural inequality. And structural inequality in this case is the literal inequality. The structure of the airplane causes women to be disallowed to fly that plane for safety reasons. And it's also structural inequality in terms of their career and promotion potential. In the Air Force, people who are fighter pilots are more likely than anybody else to reach general officer rank, colonel rank, or general officer rank. So what's happening here is that because of the design of a 50-year-old aircraft cockpit, it has the practical effect of putting a limit on how far most women in the Air Force will be able to go in their careers. That's about as strong of a structural inequality argument as you can ever make. You get structural inequality when you combine humans with their unconscious biases and limited data. The unconscious biases in the 1970s were women aren't going to fly planes, and then the limited data is how many people are we actually going to ever need to fly this plane? So that's one thing I want you to take away from this. The other big thing I want you to take away from this slide is if you have a structural problem, there is no amount of individual goodwill that will fix it. There is no amount of telling a woman pilot candidate that, you know, it'll be okay. You just need to grow 4 more inches and you'll be able to fly this plane. That's not possible. There's no possibility that a well-meaning squadron commander can redesign the airframe itself so that they can pick a greater pool of female pilot candidates to fly this plane. What happens is that the women in question either get shunted into other aircraft or they don't go into the Air Force at all. And in this case, it's the Air Force's loss. They could have the best pilot candidate that they've seen in decades, but because she can't fly that plane, she's going to take other opportunities. You don't have to take my word for it. This is what the Air Force themselves had to say. And I'm going to read the orange text. If we begin with a recruitment population that we've artificially halved because of how we design our cockpits and workstations, we've just doubled our work. And now we make every operator in the seat have to be 8 times better than the counterpart they will face. This is the heart of it all. This is what I mean when I say you're jeopardizing your own mission. The Air Force is not, by anybody's definition, a socially radical organization. So if an institution that adheres to historical tradition as much as the Air Force does realizes that excluding barriers or excluding women with structural barriers jeopardizes their mission, you can take it to the bank that any other organization, it will risk their mission as well. So with that in mind, what does structural inequality look like in the maritime sector? The first and greatest inequality in the offshore world is who lives and who dies when they go into the water. The image on the left is a small-bodied female geologist. She's working on a drill ship called the Joides Resolution. The image on the right shows that exact same woman wearing a Gumby suit, and probably a lot of you here have gotten to wear survival suits yourself, and they are designed to fit one size human being, and that is the 50th percentile North American man. So even aside from the fact that it's huge and therefore it's an entanglement or a trip hazard because she's swimming in this, they were never tested for the thermal body properties of women. There have never been thermal insulation performance tests for women. There have never even been software models that I've been able to find where women's specific thermal survival ratings have been tested. So we don't know. So what happens when you have a woman like this who goes in the water? Well, first you can see that her neck is huge. If water comes in that suit through the neck opening, it's going to compromise the thermal performance, and that's not good. It's obviously a trip and entanglement hazard. And then the worst of them is if you put that suit on and you have a whole lot of air in the legs and you don't have a way to purge the air, then what can happen is called an inversion, where you go feet up, head down in the water, can't turn yourself upright, and people drown. I've shown this slide 3 or 4 different times since the first one in Canada in this past June. And so far, I've had 3 people out of about maybe 200 that total that I've given presentations like this to come up to me and said, I've had an inversion. So we're looking at a 1% failure rate in terms of how well is the survival suit going to protect somebody. And given how few of us are unfortunate enough to go in the water in the first place, that's a really scary thing to think about. Where do these body measurements come from? Well, once again, back to the Air Force. The reference man is the 50th percentile North American male based on body measurements of male military service members from North America and Europe in the 40s to the 60s. That means that in general, these men were young. They were between the ages of 25 and 35. They were very physically fit and almost exclusively white. When you start talking about the differences between women's bodies and men's bodies, women are not small men who are scaled down to a different size. Women have different neck muscle strength. Women have different long bone strength. Women have different baseline metabolisms. Women's internal organs are arranged differently. Women have a different lung volume and thoracic volume compared to men of the same size. It is completely impossible for women to change their bodies to meet the standards of the reference man. I'm quite a tall woman. I'm 5'9", and if I did not like tacos and ice cream quite so much, I could probably weigh about the same amount as the reference man, but I'll never be able to change the bone structure of my ribs and my spine, and I will never be able to rearrange my internal organ strength to be the same as a male human. And unlike our friend Nemo here, come on, the thermal response test mannequin based on the reference man, I don't have the same metabolic and thermal response as men. The company that makes Nemo makes a female-bodied thermal test mannequin, but the female mannequins aren't designed to be in the water. This is an unconscious bias at work. People who designed it are making the assumption that the only people who are going to be working in an offshore environment are male. This is the paradox of women's safety in the maritime workplace. Women must use the same tools, the same PPE, the same furniture, and the same facilities as men, but because the workplace safety mitigations are designed for and tested on the reference man, they put women at a greater risk of illness or injury or death relative to their male colleagues working in the same environment. And also, for the record, they put men at risk as well. I work in the private sector where on our vessels, we tend to have a lot of crew members who are from the Philippines or Malaysia. So they generally are much smaller than the reference man. Their bodies weigh quite a bit less. They also have different muscle mass distributions because they come from a different population of people. And this puts them at risk too. For the next few slides, we are going to be discussing areas of how that default assumption that a male human is in the workplace puts your female colleagues and friends at a disadvantage. And then once you have that knowledge, you can start examining your own workplaces and looking through it. When I was writing the article for the International Hydrographic Review Journal, it became very obvious early on that there were three main categories of safety challenges: inadequate personal protective equipment, inadequate quartering, and poorly designed working equipment. And you can look at this slide here for examples. We've already talked about the immersion suits being too large and not cold tested for women, but what about fall protection harnesses? Are they going to work properly with your female employees? Everybody talks about, when you're talking about quartering, everybody thinks obviously that, well, you need somewhere to go to the bathroom. That's very common, but how long has it taken to get rooms where women can breastfeed or pump, or where women who are pregnant can have accommodations for that? When we're talking about equipment, when was the last time anybody here had a full ergonomic assessment in their office and determined your furniture is too big, your furniture needs to be adjusted for this? These are systemic and they're everywhere. So the next few examples, we're going to look at an example from each category and pick apart what the hazard is and learn to see the hazard so you can learn how to fix it at the source. I told you I am a couture seamstress. You are about to get a lesson in tailoring. When you are fitting clothing, you fit to the largest bone structure circumference first, and then you make allowances for the soft tissue. If you think about gloves, you want to make sure that the glove is long enough for your hand from the fingertip to the heel of your hand, and then you worry about fat fingers or thin fingers. If you are looking at coveralls, you want to base your sizing off the largest bone structure circumference of the human who's wearing them. The largest bone structure circumference for men is typically around their chest. For women, it's typically around their hips. So look at our model here in the male fit on the left and female fit coveralls. The largest body circumference for our model is around her hips. Male fit coveralls are based on chest circumference sizes. So she's had to go up 1 to 2 sizes just to get things that fit her hips properly. And that's why the crotch is sagging. That's why if you look under her arms, you can see a whole bunch of fabric bunched up under her arms. If you look at her neck, you'll notice that it's sagging around the neckline because it's designed for a much larger body circumference around the chest. And all of those things are reasons pointing to the problem, which is that this set of coveralls does not have the largest body circumference in the right place. Looking at the picture on the left and saying, oh, we'll just hem her trousers and hem her sleeves will never make it fit properly, because that's not the problem. If you look at the picture on the right, where she's wearing female fit coveralls, the largest body circumference is around the hips. They fit her correctly. They fit her appropriately everywhere else. She's got adequate coverage at the neckline. She doesn't have all kinds of fabric bunched up at the crotch or under her arms. And the sleeves are the correct length. What I want you to take away from this slide is that you will not solve gender-based PPE problems with make it small and make it pink. Women are not small men. If you want to address these issues, you need to talk with your female colleagues and tease out the root causes. You might notice something isn't right, but you can actually ask the people who are in the situation and use their lived experience to find a better design solution to the problem. Moving on to quartering. This image here is the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego, and I want to thank them for first doing the research they did, and second, for publishing it. Scripps did a laboratory review of who had lab space. And what they found is that regardless of seniority, of academic discipline, funding and grant levels, or any other lab and academic-based factors, women were given less lab space than their male counterparts. As the proportion of women research members increased, the amount of floor space allocated to men increased. And then if a woman's-led lab added more personnel and a man-led lab added more personnel, the men-led labs would always get more floor space proportionally than the women. So what was going on here, it turned out to do with legacy methods of allocating space, not allocating space on an annual basis according to needs, but according to legacy rules and giving lab space to emeritus professors. So this is clearly a career issue. If a woman doesn't get enough lab space to be able to do her work, she's not going to be able to get the grant funding that she needs, and it's going to be a career blocker. And this has been known since about 2001 with an MIT study. This is not a new problem. Why is this an HSSE issue? We now live in a world with a highly contagious, deadly respiratory virus, and it's transmitted by respiratory aerosols. Women-led labs have more people in a smaller space, and that puts them at a higher risk of respiratory disease. In the previous slide, I said that you couldn't fix PPE problems with make it smaller and make it pink. The lesson on this slide is you can't fix quartering problems with add women and stir. You have to find out what the root cause of the problem is. In this case, it is legacy space allocation standards. But you also can't try to hand wave away the increased PPE risk that this is facing. And for people who have chronic illnesses themselves, or people who have family members that are chronically ill that they're trying to protect, this will drive them out of a career and into something else. It is that serious. As a secondary note, the last bullet point on the left is that there are fewer on-site storage units. There are 32 on-site storage units for Scripps personnel. 31 of them are allocated to men. The others, everyone else goes to off-site storage. And if you've ever driven on I-5 in San Diego, you can appreciate the safety risk that driving causes. Driving is the single most dangerous thing that any of us will do on a given day. And once again, the equipment hazards caused by things being built for the reference man poses more danger to women than it does to men. If you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, I would like to draw in to notice that the women are 80% more likely to get leg injuries in crashes than men. They're double the risk of getting arm injuries than men, and they are a lot more likely to get neck injuries than men. What's going on? If you look at the arm and leg injuries, think about how the average woman is in fact smaller than average men, and your average woman in the US is smaller than that reference man of 5'9" and 170 pounds. So when she's getting ready to drive, she scoots the chair up so that she can reach the foot pedals. Therefore, her legs are closer to the steering console, her arms are closer to the steering console. In a front-end collision, when her body slides forward before it gets hit by the belt, she's much more likely to hit the steering wheel or the steering console. The easy answer, which happens to be wrong, is to say the underlying problem is an out-of-position driver. The driver's too close to the console. But who decided what is an out-of-position driver? The reference man. The underlying problem here is that a piece of equipment intended to be used by lots of different people was designed for only one type of person. Now we have something here in the left-hand image where it gives you a male 50th percentile and a female 5th percentile dummy. The female 5th percentile dummy approved by the National Highway Transportation Safety Authority is a scaled down version of the male model. She's not actually designed on women's bodies. And the 5th percentile woman is the size of the average 12-year-old child in the United States. I was taller than the 5th percentile reference dummy by my 10th birthday. So it's really unrepresentative of most women. And then even worse, she either rides as a passenger or doesn't participate in front-end crash tests at all. Some side impacts, she sits in the driver's seat, but most of them, women's bodies are not even tested for safety in driving equipment. And this is despite the fact that women are half of all drivers on the road. What I want you to take away from this is if you find out that a piece of safety equipment has been, or a piece of equipment has been tested for safety, ask if it's ever been tested on women. And chances are, if the people have done this, they'll tell you and they'll prove you the data right away. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of waffling. And then this isn't a problem that only affects the offshore industry. This is an everyone problem. Why don't we work on fixing everything? So now that we've talked about that, I'm going to open up the floor for 1 or 2 questions that people might have about the last few slides. We'll try to keep it brief so that we don't run over time. Once we've had that couple of questions, I will very quickly run through some existing solutions. Because this program will be available to people afterwards, you can read those at your leisure, and then that will leave us enough time for questions at the end. So do we have any questions at this point?
No questions so far. I do want to remind the audience that if you are interested in today's slides, they are attached as a handout to the control panel. So feel free to download them before we end this seminar.
Okay, I'm going to go on ahead. So now that we know about what safety is doing, what do we do about it? We start by acknowledging that these problems exist and that they are problems in terms of recruiting women and retaining women. If you think about our model wearing the coveralls that don't fit, nothing quite tells you that you're not considered a valued member, like saying, well, we're sorry, we know your clothes don't fit, that you're just going to have to make do. We know everybody else's clothes that fit, but you'll be fine. You'll just have to make do. It is not special treatment, people, to ask for clothing that fits. It is not special treatment to provide clothing that fits. And in fact, we collectively have a legal, moral, and ethical obligation to keep our team members in the workplace safe. Telling people, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to make do. No, no, no. We have a legal, moral, and ethical obligation to keep people safe. And we have the power to change our policies and make sure our team members know that they are included. We have the power to change that, and we have the power to make sure they know it's because you are our team members and you are important. Dignity is another way of saying mental health. If somebody is not treated with basic respect and dignity, it will impact their mental health, and they're going to find somewhere else to go. They're going to say, I'm not going to put up with this and leave. And all of that talent that you wanted in your organization has just walked out the door. That's the whole point of this. You want to keep the talent to keep your mission. We have to make sure that we take the steps to keep our talent. So what do? The modified hierarchy of controls. The hierarchy of controls is something that you can download off the OSHA website, Occupational Health and Safety and Health Association or Authority. I don't remember the acronym. The hierarchy of controls is a framework that determines which actions do the best job of reducing our exposure to hazards and therefore to harm. And reducing the exposure is the key here. We can't make everything go away, but we can make smart decisions to make them better. The pyramid shape goes from the most effective control to the last line of defense. Elimination, you physically remove the hazard. Substitution, you replace the hazard with something less hazardous. Engineering controls, you isolate people from the hazard, think of a barrier around an open manhole. Administrative controls, you change the way people work. And then finally, PPE is you protect the worker with personal protective equipment. Some groups have more resources than others, which means it's easier to find solutions, but some groups, and NOAA is one of them, where a lot of NOAA's resources are capital equipment that's decades old. The NOAA ships Rainier and Fairweather are 60 or more years old at this point and still in service. It's unrealistic to expect a full redesign or a mothballing of an existing ship that has some gender-based safety concerns. So how do we use the hierarchy of controls? The other authors in the IHR paper and I came up with what we call the modified hierarchy of controls, where we have preferred solutions and minimum adequate solutions. Preferred solutions are either elimination or substitution of hazards. They fix the problem at the source, not a well-designed workaround, and they need help from specialists sometimes to successfully implement, like putting a ship in a shipyard. Minimum adequate solutions, temporary or short-term elimination or substitution, can be implemented in short time frames with relatively low effort, and they don't address the problem at its source. So here are some examples of ones that have already been done. And again, I'm going to run through the next slide quickly so that we have time for questions at the end. Female fit coveralls. These are available on the common market. You can look online and find different brands that have them and different styles that will fit your needs. Here on the left, we have Julie wearing her old fit coveralls that don't fit well. In the middle, we have Tiziara modeling the latest and greatest in abandoned ship drill couture, including her new two-piece coveralls. And then here, people who want to know how to correctly measure women's bodies for coveralls afterwards, send me an email. Onboard sanitation. Vessels typically carry sanitary equipment for every sort of human biological sanitary need except one. This is a fixable problem. If anybody happens to be in operations listening to this, go out and add menstrual hygiene products to your grocery order tomorrow. This is a safety issue as well as a sanitation issue. If I have to wake my roommate up at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm digging around in my sea bag for a tampon, I am causing a safety problem to her because she's losing out on rest. And just because we're all adults and she understands, that doesn't mean that we should accept the status quo. If there are menstrual hygiene supplies that are part of ships' stores that I don't have to go into her room and wake her up, that's improved safety. And oh, by the way, while you're at it, install hands-free trash bins with a step pedal lid. That's privacy for anybody who might want to put something in the trash can that they don't want the rest of the crew members to know about. And also it's better hygiene for everyone. The only person who has to touch the bin with their hands is the person who is changing the trash bag, and hopefully that person is wearing gloves. Contracted transportation. Ride-sharing services have their place in the world, but they do not necessarily require fingerprinting or background checks. They don't necessarily require tracking systems. You can look online at just about any point in time and find a news article of something that happened that we don't want to happen in a ride-sharing service. So this is an example of an administrative control. You're changing people's method of working. Instead of telling your employees go get a ride share, what you do is you contract a limousine service where the drivers have had background checks and they have tracking. Pre-cruise planning. If you are doing cruise planning for something like an academic voyage, something that's very simple to do is call up the members of people who will be going on a scientific party and ask them what survival suit they need to wear. That way you can make sure there are enough of the right size survival suits on board. If you need to send some in somebody's checked luggage, you can do that. If you need to send some in a container, you can do that. But the point is you have to ask people to know what size they need. Driving. what you want to do when you are driving is try to keep your body as far away from the steering console as you can. You can use pedal extenders for short drivers. These are clamps that fit onto pedals that mean that you don't have to scoot your chair up so far. You can use seat lifting cushions so you can raise your torso higher and see over the top of the car better. You can get seatbelt adjuster clips for those of you who are built like me and are tired of having the seatbelt chafe your neck. These are all minimum adequate solutions. Preferred solutions is the next time you're buying your own personal car or, excuse me, fleet vehicles, you look for vehicles that have been tested for women's safety. You look for vehicles that have an adjustable seat height as well as sliding back and forth. You look for vehicles that have power adjustable foot pedals where the foot pedal will come to the driver instead of the driver coming to the foot pedals. And the same thing with telescoping steering wheels. You look for a steering wheel that comes out so that the driver doesn't have to sit closer to the console. The bottom line, if your organization needs people, your organization needs women. Structural biases take time to form and they will take time to fix. Start now. Ask your women what problem you have, and while you're at it, look at your smaller and larger bodied men. These are problems that will affect them too. And this is an investment in your workforce. It doesn't have to be expensive. Using contracted transportation versus a ride sharing costs essentially the same, but one of them has a lot more safety stops in it than the other. You can do this. And don't let lack of a preferred solution or lack of a complete solution stop you from solving the problem. You're doing this for the sake of your employees or your teammates. So that's all I've got for today. Everybody, thank you very much. And we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A session.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Helen. And yes, so audience, we do have some time for questions and we'd love to hear them. So put them in the questions chat box, which is located in the control panel, and I will read them to Helen. Also, if you're watching this presentation live but you want to share the recording with a colleague, click on the link in the chat box, which I just added, for NOAA Central Library's YouTube channel. I'm going to upload the recording in just a few hours, so please spread the word about this very important information. And also, as I mentioned earlier, before we end today's webinar, I encourage you to download Helen's slides, so if you'd like to use it as a reference. While we wait for questions, I just also want to encourage the people to email Helen. If you're a little shy about asking questions, that's okay. Her email is right there, and you can contact her that way. Okay, so we have the first question. This first question asks, have you ever encountered pushback from supervisors or colleagues for talking about these issues? What advice would you give to women who do experience pushback?
Keep talking until you find somebody who's willing to listen. The first several times I've brought up topics like this, they went nowhere. Or I was told, well, you go fix it. Excuse me, you're the safety professional. And I should say, I work for a private company where we do have safety departments. You're the safety professional, do your job. What happened more often is, until I found the right person, what happened more often was that I would get somebody who was interested and willing to help, but didn't know what to do. And this is normal. Everybody needs a chance to learn and grow. And if you've never had to think about something before and somebody says, hey, this is a problem and you don't know anything about it, there's going to be time that they need to learn about the problem. So what I would suggest to people is, if you come at them with a plan in hand, even if it's a very basic hand, even if it's talking about coveralls, for instance, that you print out a couple of vendors that have female fit coveralls available, then you've done the hard work for them. You're a lot less likely to meet that pushback and resistance.
Thank you. We do have another, it's actually a comment. It says, not a question, but a great appreciation for the manner and willingness to share the significant issues. The Gumby suit issue is very interesting. I see a place for improvement in our fleet right now for this.
I will tell you this, and this is partially why I have been giving these presentations in my capacity as a member of the Hydrographic Society and not related to the company I work for. I have actually been in touch with my congressional representatives trying to get funding allocated for what will eventually be survival suit redesign. And that includes getting body measurements and then building thermal mannequins, building software models of thermal performance, and that will lead into redesign. And this is something that is going to literally require an act of Congress and Parliament and also the United Nations, because survival suit carriage rules are ultimately up to the International Maritime Organization. This goes back to my comment about if you do the dirty work for someone, they're more likely to accept it the first time. I do actually have a long-term plan, and it's to get the US government to redesign a lot of survival suit materials and then take that to the IMO. And it's a lot harder to wring your hands or hand wave it away or waffle or ignore if somebody comes up to you with a solution in their hand.
Excellent. And one other question is, what are other topics that you're tackling?
Another one that I am working on is what happens to force women out of leadership tracks during the course of their career. And that's part of empowering women. If you want to think about setting up an environment where people will thrive, then you're more likely going to have people stay. But if you are like the Air Force and you don't identify structural barriers to people being able to advance, your talent is going to go elsewhere. The main part of that is showing how all of the topics that I brought up today about structural inequity, unconscious biases, lack of respect and dignity, all of these things come together. All of these things pose challenges to getting women into the field in the first place, and then getting them to stay, and then getting them to stay long enough to be in leadership roles, not even necessarily senior management, but leadership roles at all. And if you remember what I said earlier, that safety is the foundation, having a safe, respectful, dignified environment is the absolute bare minimum for everything else. But then we have to get into picking apart other places where structural barriers exist, other places where structural inequities exist, and start picking apart, well, what do we do and how do we do it?
Excellent. Thank you. That appears to be our last question.
Thank you.
Helen. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And in particular, I appreciate that you provide a lot of information to help empower women in the field. And that's really important. So audience, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the day. And there'll be a short survey when you log out. So I encourage you to just let us know what you're thinking. Have a great time. Bye-bye.